Welcome to this video on SQL Pivot and Unpivot. In this video, we are going to see how to transform table structures dynamically using Pivot and Unpivot. Let's start with pivoting. Pivoting transforms rows into columns. It creates cross-tabulation of data. It is useful for reporting and analysis. Pivoting converts normalized data into a more readable format. Let's look at a pivot example. Consider a scenario of product sales by quarter. On the left, we have the source data in row format with columns like product, quarter, and sales. On the right side, we have the pivoted data in column format, where the quarters Q1 and Q2 become separate columns for each product, showing their respective sales figures. Let's discuss the pivot syntax in SQL Server. The basic structure involves selecting from a source table and then using the pivot operator to transform the data. An aggregate function such as sum is applied to the values. The for clause specifies which columns' values become the new column headers. The in clause lists the specific values to be used as the new column headers. Columns not specified in the pivot operation will be used as grouping columns. Here's a complete example of how to use pivot in SQL. First, we create a sample table named Product Sales with columns for product, quarter, and sales. Then we insert some sample data into the table. Finally, we execute a pivot query to transform the data. The query pivots the data so that the quarter values Q1 and Q2 become the column headers and the sum of sales is calculated for each product and quarter. The key points to note are that the quarter values, Q1 and Q2, become column headers. Product becomes the grouping column. And sum aggregates multiple values per product and quarter. Now let's delve into unpivoting. Unpivoting transforms columns into rows. It normalizes cross-tabulated data. It converts report-style data into a relational format. It is the opposite operation of pivot. It is useful for data analysis and ETL processes. Here's an unpivot example showing product sales by quarter. The table on the left displays pivoted data in column format, with columns for product, Q1 and Q2. The table on the right shows the unpivoted data in row format with columns for product, quarter, and sales. This transformation converts the quarter columns, Q1 and Q2, into rows. Here is the unpivot syntax in SQL Server. The syntax involves selecting from a source table and then using the unpivot operator to transform the data. The first parameter names the column that will hold the values from the pivoted columns. The for clause names the column that will hold the original column names. The in clause lists the source columns whose values should be unpivoted. Non-listed columns are carried through as is in each output row. Here's a complete example of how to use Unpivot in SQL. First, we create a pivoted table named Pivoted Sales with columns for product, Q1 and Q2. Then we insert some sample data into the table. Finally, we execute an unpivot query to transform the data. The query unpivots the data so that the quarter column names Q1 and Q2 become values in a new quarter column, and the values from those columns go into sales column. Each product row expands to multiple rows based on the number of quarter columns. Let's summarize when to use pivot and unpivot, along with key considerations and limitations. Use pivot when transforming normalized data into report format, creating cross-tabulations for analysis, converting row data into column headers, and comparing categories side by side. Key considerations for pivot include that column values must be known in advance, always use an aggregation function such as sum or count, and dynamic SQL may be needed for unknown column values. Use unpivot when normalizing cross-tabulated or pivoted data, converting columns back to rows for analysis, preparing data for ETL processes, and performing row-by-row operations. Limitations for unpivot include that it ignores null values by default. Cross-apply with values can be an alternative. And consider using union all for simple cases. If you like this video, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. Visit codelucky.com for more such useful content.